So I was scrolling through YouTube Shorts one day, and I noticed a trend of using a soundbite from the film The Fox and the Hound, in which the characters of Todd and Copper are introducing themselves to each other. And I found it interesting in how that is used to show two people who become great friends or a couple, but it doesn't highlight the actual message of A Fox and the Hound, where it focuses on two friends who had once something in common that no longer have that thing in common and become separate from each other as they go into two different life paths, with one becoming a hunting dog whereas one just stays as a playful fox. This made me think about how other media from video games, television, and film gets misinterpreted through social media, and an author's message can get wildly changed by different social media users depending on different kinds of narratives that they want to form around that media. In the manosphere, you see influencers like Andrew Tate and Sneeko try to glorify characters like Walter White and Patrick Bateman as people you should aspire to be like in terms of how they make money and are successful and fight for their families and make money for their families, when in fact, characters like these are critiques of these manosphere influencers, as Walter White, for example, shows the problems with the manly bravado stylings that characters like Andrew Tate and Sneeko promote, as Walter White ends up losing his family because of his actions. And with Patrick Bateman, he is a critique of shallow capitalism and how it creates people that only care about money and not really anything else. 2019's Joker is another example of this, as the general audience and the social media side of the internet got a whole different message from the Joker than what Todd Phillips, the director, intended. When Arthur Fleck turned into the Joker, many in the general audience cheered as they saw this as an empowering moment, and this could be due to the music of the scene making you feel like it's an empowering moment, but it really should not have been this cheered on, as just before the scene, the character of Arthur Fleck had murdered one person and traumatized another person that was a friend of his. I just find it interesting how people started cheering for this Joker character and started gravitating towards him and forming a following around him. The general audience's positive reception of the character of Joker might be the reason why Todd Phillips chose to make Joker 2 a deconstruction of the original Joker film, as he did not want to support this interpretation of the character, as he himself saw this as a mentally disturbed character that should not be aspired to, but rather seen as a warning sign of what could happen in a society. Now, media misinterpretation is not a new phenomenon, as we've seen past media have their message either changed or ignored by the general viewing audience. As an example, you can take a look at many songs from the past. Songs like Fortunate Son and Born in the USA might be at first glance assumed to be patriotic songs about supporting the United States, but they are in fact critiques of the United States during the Vietnam War, with Fortunate Son, for example, being a critique of how the rich get to avoid the Vietnam War whereas the poor do not. And Born in the USA is a critique of how the Vietnam vets aren't treated well after coming back home from Vietnam. But you still see a lot of politicians, especially on the Republican side, using these songs to exude patriotism when they're entering, for example, a convention or conference. Alright, now don't tell your grandma this, but the song Electric Avenue by Eddie Grant is about race riots, and the song Hey Ya by Outkast is about broken relationships. Alright, so we can probably excuse some of this misinterpretation back in the day, as information access was not as prevalent as it is today. But what's the excuse for it today, where a lot of people misinterpret a lot of media, when we have access to an infinite amount of information, including direct messages from the artists themselves about why they made this piece of art and what's the meaning behind it? Now, I believe there are three reasons why our media discussion today is so full of bad faith criticism as well as misinterpretations of the artist's intent with the work. And these three reasons are: 1, fan hero worship; 2, reactionary reviews; and 3, narratives designed around our media. Now, to explore these points, I want to go through them using the example of Joker 2, as I feel like the fan reception of that movie perfectly highlights my 3 points. Alright, so on the point of hero worship, while the Joker is not a heroic character, he is somewhat admired and worshipped by a certain fan base that really sympathizes with a lot of the Joker's views and talking points about the differences in classes and mental health issues. And so you see him having a dedicated fan base towards him. And the problem with having a dedicated fan base is that if you attempt any form of deconstruction of that character, then the fan base is going to really dislike that, as seen with examples of Luke Skywalker and Joel from The Last of Us series. So when a character becomes idealized, kind of like the Joker, as well as more heroic characters like Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman, then the fans will really identify with them, and thus by identifying with them, they're connected to these characters on a personal, emotional level. And the problem with someone being connected to a personal, emotional level with a character is that it becomes harder to talk about those characters' flaws, as it becomes sort of sacrilegious, as it would seem like if that character has flaws, then that means that the person that likes that character also has flaws. At least that's what it might be perceived as by the fans, and thus the fans will see this as an attack on them by the writers or executives or whoever. And this leads me into my next point about a lot of reviewers being more reactionary nowadays in terms of how they look at different media from films, movies, and games. In today's media environment, it's important for reviewers to be getting out the reviews as fast as possible in order to get people to click on the reviews and thus make profits from people watching or reading your reviews. When you have to make a review as fast as possible for a movie, you don't have time to mull over and think about what exactly some of these scenes mean, or how does cinematography help with the story's themes, and how, for example, everything was designed, etc. You don't have time to think about all those different aspects, and you can only think about the general story and how you felt emotionally about it. The problem with this is that a lot of reviewers will probably keep in mind the endings of the film more rather than the entire film as a whole. As with Joker 2, I feel as though a lot of the backlash against the film was more about the ending of the film rather than the film as a whole, as the ending would leave a lot of fans of the Joker character angry, and I'm not going to spoil what the ending is, but you can figure it out for yourself. I myself thought it was okay, but a little iffy, but that's my thoughts on that. But with a lot of people being more reactionary about films, they're going to be more emotional, and thus when they're more emotional, they're more likely to give a film a more drastic rating of either a 1 or a 10 out of 10 in terms of how good the quality of the movie is. And so there's a very little room for nuance in movie reviews nowadays, at least on the YouTube platform. Joker 2, in my opinion, was more of a middling film rather than a really bad film, as we've had plenty of terrible comic book movies in this year alone, with Madam Web being an example of that. And so I think people are just reacting more emotionally about this rather than logically about how good the quality of the film is as a whole. As a lot of the performances I felt were really of quality, like Brendan Gleeson's performance, as well as Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga's performance to a degree. And I did really like the character of Mr. Puddles, as I really felt the emotional depth of his character and how traumatized he was with the Joker's actions. Alright, so now on to my final point. That's the narratives that are built around media, and in particular, I'm talking about how a lot of YouTubers already decide whether a film is good or not before they even watch a film. As with a lot of these right-wing grifter types out there, as an example, saying that films like several Marvel movies, Star Wars movies, as well as Joker 2 are attacks on the fans just because of what some executive or writer said in an article somewhere. And thus, this leaves a negative impression on the movie before it's even released, and thus, less people are going to be watching the film and judging it on its own merit. But those are just my thoughts on the matter. If you guys have your own thoughts on why media misinterpretation is prevalent today on social media platforms, I would like to hear that in the comments below. And if you guys liked what you heard and want to hear more like this, please give us a like and subscribe, and comment down below anything that you want to say. And yeah, I think that's it. Talk to you guys later then. Bye.